Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Cambridge Union Society. Thank you for joining us. As you're all aware, this evening we're honoured to be joined by Andy McNab, the former SAS operative who rose to prominence with his book Brave 2.0. Andy will be giving about half an hour speech, and then be an opportunity for you to ask questions and buy and get a book signed afterwards, if you would like. Can I just say, for obvious reasons, there is a especially strict no photography and filming rule tonight. Anyone caught with a phone out will be asked to leave immediately, so we'd really appreciate it if you could stick to those rules.
Good evening. Good evening. Let's go right back. As I said, what I thought I'd do is talk for about half an hour, how I got into the military, what happened during my time there, and what eventually happened when I got out. You know, getting involved obviously in writing books, working on film, TV, newspapers, that sort of thing. Joining the army wasn't exactly what I thought I was going to be doing. When I was 16, I was in juvenile detention. I was in what was called the Borstal system, which the government at the time decided that everybody, all juveniles who had committed offences, needed what was called a short, sharp shock. So you'd go into these systems called Borstals between 4 to 6 months, and basically just get shouted at a lot, really. There wasn't much going on. So what was happening, there was organisations that were coming into the Borstal system to try and get them out as an experiment about social mobility. And one of those organisations was the Army, the British Army. So they used to come into the Borstals and recruit boy soldiers. So I was about 3 months into my sentence, and I was in North London, a Borstal in North London, and I come from South London. I might as well be in, you know, I might as well be on Mars. I didn't know where I was, you know. So I never, ever had been north of the river anyway. And there was guys from places from Leeds and Mansfield. I didn't even know where they were. So all of us had what we call our sentence intake. Sorry about the throat. It's gone a bit sore this week. All of us, 47 of us from our sentence intake, we got shouted into a lecture hall where we saw this fantastic recruiting film. It was a helicopter pilot in a small 2-seater helicopter called a Scout with a Perspex dome, you know, bubble at the front, and he's flying very, very low over the beaches of Cyprus. He's got a pair of shorts on and a t-shirt, and as he's flying, he's waving at the girls are waving at him, and the recruiting sergeant said, "Who wants to be a helicopter pilot in the army?" So all of us naturally put our hands up, because the idea was, if you get accepted into the army, you didn't have to go back into the detention system until you got your place, your time to join the military. So that very day we was all taken off to Sutton Coldfield near Birmingham. Again, I didn't have a clue where it was. And for 3 days of selection to find out where you would fit in the army. And certainly with us lot, they didn't need 3 days. They knew on the first, easily, within probably the first morning, that none of us were going to be helicopter pilots. Because we could just about do our bootlaces up, let alone anything else. So we all landed up in the infantry. And I went into a light infantry regiment called the Royal Green Jackets, which are now called the Rifles, which is a light infantry brigade. And as a 16-year-old, as a boy soldier, I went to what was called an Infantry Junior Leaders Battalion. And the idea of these IJLBs was to train you for a year to be an infantryman. So when you went to your battalion, you was fully trained. But at the same time, to teach you to be the future leadership of the army. So I got there. Part of the juvenile detention system, the Borstal system, had different regimes, and they were trying out different things all the time. So the place I went, we had crew cuts, and we used to wear, have you seen Dad's Army? That, you know, that sort of old Second World War uniform? We used to wear the blue one, the Royal Air Force one, in the Borstal that I was in. So I thought, I've cracked it. I've already got a haircut, I've already had a uniform on, so I'm halfway there. I got to IJLB, they took another layer off, and I had to start shaving every day as a 16-year-old. And not only, I didn't start shaving properly until I was 19, but, you know, I was 16, face full of zits. I'm cutting them off every morning, trying to shave. I didn't know what I was doing. Lots of shouting, lots of hollering about, jumping, and all that sort of stuff you'd expect what's happening in an infantry training environment. And I thought, well, I don't particularly like this army business, because if I'd stayed in Borstal, I'd only do 2 more months, and that would have been my sentence. And it was exactly a bit like Borstal. But it was really after the 3-month period, what was called the bedding in period, where for me my life changed, and many people there as well, because we all got shouted out of our block, and we got marched to the Army Education Centre. And I didn't even know the Army had teachers. I didn't know they had, a school. We all got put in classrooms, 20 per classroom or whatever. And by now, as 16-year-olds in the Army, we knew we just sat there and shut up. So we're just sitting there. There was no sort of teacher, no instructor in the room until the world's oldest man came in. And now he was sort of, he was early 40s. But to me, as a 16-year-old, the world's oldest man came in, and he was a captain. 3 pips on his shoulder. He's a guy who'd done 22 years in the Army as a non-commissioned officer, and risen to the rank of a regimental sergeant major, and has taken a commission. And he chose, instead of going back to the infantry, to join the Army Education Centre and teach the likes of me. When he got into the classroom, we're still not saying anything. He didn't say anything. He just walked around the class until he got to the window, and he pointed out the window, and we were on the edge of the camp, and there's the barbed wire and the fence and all that sort of thing that you would expect in a camp. And he said, right, everybody the other side of the fence, everybody out there thinks you're thick as shit because you're in here, because you're in the infantry. But you're not. You're not thick, you are uneducated. And from today, that all changes. And it was only then that I'd learned I had the numeracy and the literacy of an 11-year-old. Unfortunately, that still hasn't changed in the British Army. The average, it's a fact, the average age of an adult infantry recruit going to what's called the Infantry Training Centre in Catterick, near Darlington, is of an 11-year-old. And British military education, the free services, is the biggest adult education in Europe for this system, because they've got to take those sort of people that have fallen through the cracks and educate them to work in the services. So by then I was nearly 17, and used to buy the Sun newspaper. So page 3 is easy enough, isn't it? It's like, well, it's news in briefs now, so there's a few words, isn't it? But used to turn onto the back pages and read the sport, and there were words that I would never understand, and I used to make them up, because now I write for papers like the Sun. I'm their security expert. So what do you want to know? I'll quickly look on Google and then write about it. But I also write for some other newspapers, American newspaper, Wall Street Journal, and UK and the American version of the Financial Times and the Sunday papers. The one thing that all papers have in common is that, despite their style sheets, is that someone with the reading age of a 12-year-old must be able to read it and understand what's being said. And that wasn't happening to me as I was nearly 17. But there, it started to improve. And it was the place, within a week of going to the Army education system that I had to go into now, it changed my life. The first book I read was a book called Janet and John Book 10, which was a series of books that were written for primary school kids. And obviously, Janet and John Book 10 was at the top of the range. So you'd be 10 or 11 to go through that series. And it was Janet and John. There was lots of pictures and just straight paragraphs on each page. Janet and John, brother and sister, who went around, climbing trees, beating up their dog, and that sort of stuff. And there was a vocab at the back. So I had it for a week. We then had to individually go up to this educator and read the book. And he said, right, close the book. He said, right, remember the feeling of reading for the very first time a book and closing it. Because every time you read, you're going to gain more knowledge. And every time you gain more knowledge, you get more power to do what you want to do, as opposed to doing what everybody else wants you to do, because you can do it on your own terms. And for me, it became almost evangelical, this point of, I'm not thick, I'm uneducated, and actually, if I get an education, it's going to work. What I didn't realise at the time was that when you join the army, whether you can be the best corporal in the world, if you don't get certain academic qualifications, you're going nowhere. The same as when you go to become a sergeant. So there was lots of incentive to get an education. So I left IGLB, I went to my battalion, and I served in the Green Jackets for 8 years. And the war at that time was in Northern Ireland. And certainly for an 18-year-old soldier, fantastic. You know, we used to go between 4 and 5 months every year. You got 50 pence extra a day, very exciting, and soft toilet paper in Northern Ireland. Because the army in the UK used to give you that tracing paper stuff. And as a boy soldier, we used to have signs in the cubicles of the washrooms and used to say, remember, 3 sheets only, 1 up, 1 down, 1 shine. And all of a sudden now we could have all this soft toilet paper. It's fantastic. Save up about £1,000 every tour, come back, get ripped off buying a second-hand car. The dealers in these garrison towns, they used to hand paint these things, you know, keep them together. But nobody really cared, you know, because they would fall apart, they would, you know, you would crash them, they get stolen, so nobody bothered with tax or insurances. The things were, you know, they would die within about 6 months. But that didn't matter because you're going to go back to Northern Ireland, save up another £1,000, use all the soft toilet paper and do the same again. So I've done that for about 4 years. No money at the end of it and certainly no car at the end of it. So I thought I've got to start sorting myself out. And eventually became a sergeant in the infantry, in the Green Jackets. And it was then that I thought about going for the Special Air Service. And we can, if people are interested in that, in fact anything, we can do that during question and answer. And in fact, if I don't know the answer, I'll tell you it's a secret or something, so I can get away with it. But so I went for a selection on Special Air Service. I failed the very first time. About 40% of people going through who actually eventually get in fail on that first attempt. Got in on my second attempt. And when you join, you lose all your rank. So I was a sergeant. I've now become a private soldier again, what we're called trooper, and served in the Special Air Service for 10 years, and done all those things. You know what we read about or you hear about really. Apparently Ross Kemp, when he was playing Special Air Service soldier, I don't know, held his breath for 6 hours underwater and fought with knives, and we do all that sort of stuff on the counter-terrorism team. We don't. So we'd serve times on the counter-terrorism team. Obviously, you know, all the guys in the black equipment and the sort of, you know, I don't know, coming through windows and all that sort of stuff. I went back to Northern Ireland first for a year with what was called the Troop, which is the Special Air Service contingent of that campaign. And for me, it's fantastic because as a soldier, you're up to there in Kevlar and a helmet and patrolling and, you know, getting shot at and things thrown at you. And all of a sudden, I was there with this, you know, Michael Jackson, 1978 sort of permed, big, bushy hair. I was driving a Peugeot 205 Turbo in civilian clothes for a year. It was fantastic. I came back from that, spent a lot of time in Africa. A lot of the colonial states that were given independence in the 60s, you know, the regimes that we thought were going to be pretty good were pretty bad. There was internal conflicts. There were different defense agreements between those states. So sometimes we would support the rebels because we thought they were better. Sometimes we would support the government because they thought we were better. We were pretty fickle. So for that I had to learn Swahili, which turned out to be a waste of time because everybody spoke English and supported Manchester United. That's all they wanted to know was about Manchester United. So a lot of time in Africa. And then got involved in what was called the First Strike policy in Colombia. At that time, certainly when the manufacture of cocaine, the process was changed to use baking powder, which was obviously cheaper to produce and quicker to produce cocaine. Once the Colombians discovered that, an offshoot of using baking powder was crack cocaine, which was obviously cheaper and more addictive. And by that time, the American society was starting to crumble, certainly at the lower end of it, because of this epidemic. And certainly the Brits were worried about that as well, whether we're going to get this social decline in the UK because of crack cocaine. So the CIA had an operation called First Strike in Colombia at that time to try and hit the drug manufacturing plants in the rainforest, which are pretty low-level things. You know, the techniques are quite sophisticated, but the way they, you know, physically produce it, it was very, you know, areas about the size of this. The largest one would be twice the size, and that would be a big one. Cut out of the jungle, camouflaged, so they could be used, they could be burnt, and people move on. The idea is if we can find the drug manufacturing plants, destroy them at source, but even more importantly, kill the people that produce it, that are mainly North Americans and Europeans, we could slow the amount of certainly crack cocaine coming into the two countries. I used to spend a lot of time in the rainforest with the anti-narcotics police, who, didn't really want to be there. They're earning about $100 a month. Their families are getting targeted whilst they're away. They're getting killed when they go home on leave. So when we used to find one of these places and get set to do an attack in the rainforest, they used to pick the coca leaf. It grows. It's an indigenous plant. It grows at certain elevation. And whilst they're on patrol, they'll just pick the leaf, wrap it up in sugar, and then pop it in their mouths as if it was chewing tobacco. So the night before the attack, we'd have them hold them, literally in some cases, just a couple of 100 metres away in the rainforest from where this drug manufacturing plant is, to move them into what was called start lines, where they would be for the attack. And obviously, they don't want to do it. So by the time we'd get them to the start line, they're doing Michael Jackson moon dances, they're shooting at pink elephants, because they're totally off their heads. Which would compromise the operation. So we literally had to take all their coca leaf off them, their sugar, and even their ammunition the night before, get them on the start line, and then put their magazines on to start the attacks. And obviously, always wanting to get these attacks in by Thursday night, so the helicopters can pick us up and take us to Bogota for the weekend. Of course, which was more, just as important as the war on drugs. Started to work back in Northern Ireland in an organisation called 14 Intelligence Group, and what's called 14 In, or the DET, and as in the detachment. And what it is a group of people that their sole task was to identify active service units of nationalist terrorist organisations, the Provisional IRA, National Irish Liberation Army, those sort of groups. So they work very much in the cell system, much like today's terrorist does, and even the French resistance did. So you might only know one other member of your ASU. You won't know where your weapons are, where your bomb-making equipment is. You don't know what your next job is until you need to know. So if we can identify one member, we follow them, we coerce the people that are around them to find out information. Because what we're trying to do is join the dots of an ASU. And once we've joined those dots, as we do that, we're trying to identify a weak member of the ASU. Because what we'll do then is we will turn him into a source, an informer. And there's many ways you could do that. First of all, you see if he's got a weakness. It may be drugs, alcohol, gambling, heavily in debt. Those sort of weaknesses. If he hasn't got a weakness, sometimes we invent them. We give them certain sort of sexual perversions, and we join them to clubs in Amsterdam, all that sort of stuff. So we've got a pack, if you like, to present to show that he's not who he seems that he is, and hopefully they can blackmail him into doing that. Or he may have a member of his family that are, I don't know, say his mother may need cancer care, and we can guarantee we can get his mother to the front of the queue, whatever it took to get the weaker member a source. And what we do, basically, we kidnap them, get them in the back of the car, we drive them out the city. We operate in Derry, myself and another guy from B Squadron, 22 Special Air Service, and we would then do our pitch, if you like, to the guy. And the pitch wouldn't be done by us, because obviously you can tell by my voice, I don't come from Derry, I come from South London. So we used to use special branch, that was good, man, special branch, done again, special branch officers from, undercover officers from Derry themselves. So the reason why there's always a restriction on photography isn't to do with Iraq and all that sort of stuff. It's to do with working with these guys who are still there. And in fact, 2 of them are still working there. So we do the pitch, hopefully get a source, and that would then get that ASU under, if you like, the security forces belt. Because what it was all about was stopping soldiers getting killed, as soldiers, as I was, as 18, 19, 20, walking around, up to there in body armour. They're the ones who were taking casualties. It wasn't us. We're driving around in fast cars and living in safe houses. It was the young squaddies on the ground that were getting killed, and it was all about making sure you kept them safe. About the 6-year point in my time in the Special Air Service, by then I'd been promoted. I've gone through the ranks again, and I was the troop sergeant of my troop, 7th Troop, which was the air assault troop of B Squadron. And the Gulf War had started. Saddam Hussein had invaded Kuwait. We thought we weren't going to become involved in that war because we were on the counter-terrorism team again. You know, we was with Ross Kemp, underwater knife fighting or whatever he does, with all the black gear on. But what happened, the counter-terrorism team our tour got cut short, and half of the squadron was sent to my squadron, half of my squadron, we were sent to Saudi. And we started to plan and prepare to do the classic special forces, what we call green options, in uniform, heavy weapons, that sort of thing. Duck. Yeah, I've gone lost now, haven't I? Cutting lines of supply, lines of communication, those sort of thing. So my troop, which was the air assault troop, our plan, or the plan we would be given, we were planning and preparing to jump into a power station to the southeast of Baghdad that supplied grid to that area of the city. Because before the air war started, there was going to be this big wave of air attacks, knocking out the grids in the city and the water supply, all that sort of stuff. But they weren't too sure where the turbines were. Well, they knew where the turbines were. They weren't too sure that they'd be able to get them to the turbines as an air attack. So what it had to be was a hands-on attack. So we were going to fly in and we were going to jump from 400 feet and a static line. You know, you're hooked up. It's that traditional sort of jump out and the parachute opens up. Problem with that, it takes 200 feet for the canopy to fully deploy. You have all your equipment in your Bergen, your backpack, and that is dangling from your parachute at the back, attached by hooks on a 9-meter line. So the theory is you should be jumping out, canopy deploys, sort yourself out, pull your hooks, and your equipment dangles below you. And then, you parachute and jump in at night, you hear your Bergen drop, and then you get ready to, what's basically called accept the landing. You learn how to, parachute rolls, landing falls and all that, but nobody does them. You just land like a bag of rubbish at night. You just accept the landing. But jumping at 400 feet, you have got no time for that. So as soon as you get out, what you've got to do is start thinking about banging out your hook, so your Bergen drops. And if you've got twists, well, you just got to try and kick them out because you've got no reserve, because you wouldn't be able to use a reserve. So we were getting, getting a bit worked up about that. So we thought, well, we're looking at 20% casualties just going into this thing, just by nature of operations. Everything was cancelled because Saddam Hussein started to fire Scud missiles into Israel, trying to bring Israel into the war. And because the alliance, the theory was the alliance with the Arab nations would collapse because no Arab nation is going to fight alongside Israel against another Arab nation. So all of the Special Air Service and a third of the Allied Air Force, everything was retasked to go and find Scuds. So I was given the job of taking an 8-man foot patrol to the northwest of Baghdad to try and find a fibre optic cable that was sending the information of where and when to fire these Scuds from the headquarter element in Baghdad to the Scud teams in the Western Desert. And the theory was, keep that line of communication cut. The Scuds will be sort of sitting there twiddling their thumbs, whilst the rest of the Special Air Service are out, will find them and destroy them, whether physically themselves or bring in fast jet support. Fine, we didn't know where the fibre optic cable was exactly. And we didn't really know what to do when we found it, whether we blow it up or headbutt it. We weren't too sure. Didn't know what to do. But the idea was to get out there, find it, and cut it. And so off we went, but we didn't find it. And in fact, we were compromised on the operation and had to head towards Syria, which was the closest country with a friendly embassy that were going to take us, which would be the American or the British embassy. And they're called war RVs. And what you do, you get to those embassies, you don't knock on the door, they won't let you in. You make sure you haven't got a weapon, jump over the fence and cuddle a tree to show you're not a threat. And then you've got a system of code words and passwords to get you through a system. As we went towards Syria, pursued by the Iraqi military, 3 were killed, 4 were captured, myself included, and only 1 made it over Syria and eventually to the British embassy. And then he got filtered back to the Brit lines in Cyprus. So the four of us spent time in both interrogation centers in Baghdad and Abu Ghraib prison, which I didn't know at the time, but obviously it's well known now because of the American abuse of Iraqi prisoners during the last Gulf War. Served another 3 years after the Bravo 20 experience. And Bravo 20 is simply a radio call sign. It's the second patrol of B Squadron, Bravo 20. And this time I went to a group called Revolutionary Warfare Wing. There's two wings in the Special Air Service. You've got Counter Revolutionary Warfare Wing, and part of that is, operations like Northern Ireland, the DET, the counter-terrorism team, those sort of things, where you're trying to stop things. There's another group that have much more fun because their job is to start things up, and that's called Revolutionary Warfare Wing. So I spent my last 3 years there starting fights rather than trying to stop them. It was fantastic. And it was during this time I was approached by a private military company to go back to Colombia because the American operation there, the CIA operation, stopped being called First Strike. It was being handed out to private enterprise. It was going to be called Plan Colombia. And some Brit and American companies had that contract. And so there was Brits and Americans who were being approached to see if they want to do that job. So there's about 12 of us got out of the Special Air Service and getting ready. It was then when I got the approach by the military to write Bravo 20. And I thought, I'll give it a go. It took 3 months to write. I thought, right, this writing business is easy. 3 months. Sent it to the publishers, and immediately they sent it back and they said, it's rubbish. I went, what? They said, well, it's too dry. Because what I'd done this last 3 years is do debriefs, presentations to different organizations, different military academies. So, in fact, what I've done is present a military debrief. So I was told to read a book called Touching the Void by Joe Simpson. I haven't seen the film. There is a film. I haven't seen it because I don't want to ruin the book. But they said if you can get the sense of place and the emotion that Simpson puts into his book, then it might work. So I read the book and still do now. It's just fantastic. The way that he can, he explains, even the numbness of his fingers trying to manipulate rope and the emotion of cutting down rope where he knows that his friend's on the other end and his friend's going to fall down, off the mountain side. The way that's described is fantastic. So it took about 4 months, actually, to do that with this sort of 110,000 words that I already had. And book was published. I was back in Colombia working for this private military company. The publishers rang and I said, do you know what? This book is doing all right. And in fact, what it became was the biggest selling war book of all time around the world, and still is. And I said, do you fancy doing another one? And I went, well, what do you think? Give us a ticket. I'll be back tomorrow. And that's how the next phase really happened for me, getting involved in books and film. Because when I came back, I got involved in a film called Heat. I don't know if people have seen it. It's Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, sort of automatic weapons, downtown Los Angeles. It's fantastic. 7 months in Los Angeles working on this film. And in fact, I got awarded this award in Los Angeles. It was the most realistic gun-playing film, or something like that. I got the phone call. They said, right, we're going to send you tickets, and you come over, you'll get this bit of cut glass. Great. It never happened, because 3 days before that, the First Bank of America in Los Angeles got hit exactly the same as the film. Guys in body armor, automatic weapons. And when the police followed up and went to the house where they'd been planning this thing, my books were there, posters of the film, and 9 policemen got shot during the raid. So I was on the phone to the guys in Los Angeles. I said, it's not going to happen, is it? They went, no. I said, but can I still come over because I've got the tickets? And they went, no. And that was it. So that never really happened. And then started to get involved with more pre-production of film. In some of the Jason Statham films, which are purely sort of action films, Black Hawk Down, those sort of bigger stories as opposed to action. It's more importantly, Black Hawk Down is a story as opposed to an action film, the way that it's perceived. And working in pre-production of that. And then carrying on writing the books, the Nick Stone series of books, which is a guy who's out of the Special Air Service and obviously gets involved every year. He gets involved in events where he's trying to get out. And that's always in the first-person narrative. The problem with that is that everything's got to come to the character for him to decide what's going on, as opposed to the new character, which is the new book outside called Red Notice, which is Tom Buckingham, who's a serving member of the Special Air Service. In fact, he was called Tom Mullin, but the Americans said that actually he didn't sound British enough, so he's now Tom Buckingham. So it's, but that's in third-person narrative, and that's great for me because I was brought up on TV and film, and I had no history of reading. So for me, writing books is always a series of pictures. It's always prologue, 3 acts, and an epilogue, and the chapters are actually the commercial breaks in my mind. It's a series of pictures, and paragraphs are scenes. So to write in the third person, which is for the first time I've done it, was a fantastic experience, and I'm thinking about moving in that direction anyway. I've just checked out. I'm going to shut up, so my throat's going, and I'm up on time. As I say, I'll just open it up to questions, and I'll keep on answering them until someone says shut up. And that's it. That's it, then we're off. Oh, there's always one.
When you were in Northern Ireland, what would you do if someone did not accept your pitch?
There's not a lot we could do. And in some cases, you'd quite admire that they wouldn't accept it. In fact, there was one guy that we, because he dealt with a lot of youth groups, is one guy that we set it up in a way that he possibly had a relationship with 16-year-olds. And he said, okay, expose it. I don't care. Because no one will believe you. And actually, looking back, no one would. And there's nothing we could do. And then you actually admire the guy for doing that. But it's not as if he was going to go back and tell everybody he's been lifted and Special Branch have made a pitch to him. Because no one's going to believe him that he said no. So therefore, and obviously it would be explained to him that, if he repeats what's been going on that evening, it wouldn't be trouble from us, it would be trouble from the opposition. So therefore, the system worked actually quite well. But they were on the minority of the people where you would pitch or you would do something, you would manipulate a situation to get them in. 9 out of 10 times, sources were quite easy to do because it would be drugs, debt, gambling, those sort of everyday sort of vices where they were secrets. And 9 out of 10 times, a source will become a source for something as little as £80 a week. Because you can't give them more than they would naturally sustain in their lifestyle. Because you can't give them £5,000. They would never have £5,000 in their life. So therefore, you can't do that. So you only give them what they can sustain. In some cases, it would be £30, £40 a week. Not a lot. But it would feed, or it would pay for whatever the addiction or whatever the problem is in their life. And that was all they were concerned about. But the guys who said no, actually, you'd come back and go, well, okay, fair one. You'd sort of admire them. Because it's quite say, when they get lifted off the street, they don't know what's going on. There's a lot of pressure on them. And they're in the middle of nowhere. And sometimes we bring a couple of Fijians over as well. And they always look like they're fed up, don't they? So you get a couple of Fijians just looking at them all the time. And then we get them to put Special Air Service berries on, the guys from the squadrons, the Fijians from the squadrons. So even that was even more intimidating. But some would say no. But that was part of the game. That's why they're called players. They're not called the enemy. They're called players.
Thank you. You mentioned the way that you were recruited to the army and the way that
Sorry, can you say again? I can't hear.
Sorry, you spoke about how you were recruited to the army and the way that you were... for you, obviously, it worked out very well, and clearly it was a good thing to do. Do you think that it was slightly underhand, the way they just took these people from very, very disadvantaged backgrounds and said, you could be a helicopter pilot who can attract girls, and then possibly it wasn't necessarily the fairest way of recruiting people?
No, not at all. It's the way the recruitment goes. I think that it's not as if within the following day you're going to, no one makes you join the army. When you turn up at the equivalent of Sutton Coldfield now, the way that the military is portrayed, it's all about getting the trade and an experience. But it's, you go into the supermarket and you buy a chocolate bar. It's exactly the same. The experience, and how wonderful it's going to be. But the reality is, it's a bar of chocolate. When you join in the army, you will, you get to a point very quickly within the first 3 days of the selection process where you know you can be. And that's up to you. And even when you join, you can get out during that first 6 months. It's no big problem at all. So I don't think there's anything cynical in that. Not at all, because there's always cut-offs. Unfortunately, as a junior leader, once you pass that 6 months point, you was committed for 6 years because of the investment. Like any business, they put a certain amount of money to train you, so they want want to get that investment out of you. So as a junior leader, you had to sign on for 6 years. And that was the only, if you like, downside of it. And certainly as a 16-year-old, 6 years seemed like a lifetime anyway, but it just went like that. No, I don't think there's anything cynical about it at all. People are very aware what they join. We've been in, post 9/11 wars now for many years, over a decade now. So people are aware of what they're going into. I'm saying yes, I don't know. There's the mic. Yes.
So I guess over your time in the military, you've had to kill some people. How does it feel to kill someone in cold blood, and how do you feel afterwards?
Well, I don't think it is in cold blood. I think that there's, of course, during the time in the Green Jackets, they've killed people. In the Special Air Service, I've killed people. I don't think anything's been in cold blood. There's been some of it's been remotely, obviously, because by definition, what you want to do is everything as far away from the threat as possible. That's why we have long-range weapons and all that sort of stuff to stop conflict being physical. The more gap you've got, the better. Yeah, but I don't feel good. I don't feel bad, actually. It's. I'll give you an example. The first person I killed was when I was 19. And it was a guy called Peter McAvenna, and he was an Irish terrorist. I was a 19-year-old squatty, as I said, like walking the streets, that sort of thing. And my fault, I walked into an ambush. Turned the corner, and there was 6 guys there with their weapons and all that sort of stuff. So we had what was called a cabbie. There was no system to it. There was no organisation, because it was quite, maybe from here to the wall. So everybody was scared. I'm scared, they're scared, everybody's scared, because everyone's got guns, everybody knows we've got to fire them, but actually we might get hit. So we had a cabbie, and then you just fire at everything and everyone. I've been in the army since I was 16, so it was about 3 years I've been in the army. I know my weapon drills, I can change magazines, I can do all that sort of stuff quite slickly. But when you're in a contact and you're flapping, you run out of ammunition, trying to get another magazine on. It's not the same as doing it in training. After that event, I killed this guy, Paddy McAvenna. He was only about 6 or 7 months older than me. And I shot another 2 guys as well. So they're wounded and all that sort of stuff. After the event, that was the first kill of that tour, of the tour of my battalion in Northern Ireland. If you got a kill or an A1 arrest, there was an incentive to do that, because you got 2 weeks extra leave at the end of the tour. So you left 2 weeks before the battalion left. So that was great, because it's called a RIP, a relief in place, which is a nightmare where patrols have literally got to replace each other on the ground, and then you leave and get a helicopter, and you don't see your kit for 3 weeks because it's all over the place. So I left 2 weeks before that because I got this kill, and so it was sort of a good moment for everybody, But actually, what I couldn't tell anybody was that I was scared. And I was very scared, because I was in that environment where, lots of sort of, 19, 20, 21-year-old young men You know, we're all macho. You know, we've got rifles, we've got helmets, all that sort of stuff. But I was scared. But I couldn't tell anyone, or I thought I couldn't tell anyone because I was immature, too immature to understand that it's natural. It was only when I got into Special Forces, on my very first operation, which was in Southeast Asia. The squadron had already been there for a number of months, and I joined them as the new boy. And there was quite a large contact. And we got back into the patrol base a couple of days later, and you got senior NCO sergeants who'd been in Special Forces for 16, 17 years, sitting down saying, I didn't like that, that got me flapping. They were scared. But everybody by then, they were mature enough to be able to talk about it. And what I've learned, what I learned very quickly, that being scared is quite natural because it brings everything into focus, and it's almost sort of like a survival instinct. And the people who say they're not scared are liars, or they're mentally deficient. They shouldn't be doing the job anyway. So it's not as if it's, going back to the way that the question was asked, it's not as if it's in cold blood. It's not as if, I've laid awake thinking about it, but it's not as if, put a notch into the belt or whatever, into the rifle butt or whatever it is that, we're supposed to do. It's just part and parcel of what goes on. And 9 out of 10 times you're doing it because they're trying to do it to you. In some cases not. In some cases you're ambushing them. The idea is what's called a fighting patrol, and you're out there to kill them. But the job spec of the infantry is to close with, in close contact, and destroy the enemy. That's the job of the infantry, to kill people. So it's just trying to put it in a more realistic sense. It's not, oh my God, the drama of it. That's what soldiers get paid to do. And if they don't like it, they can always get out. It's not a problem with that.
So what are the people that actually cannot deal with it?
Yes, there are, yeah. There are people who cannot deal with it and they've left. There's people who couldn't deal with it and are suffering post-traumatic stress disorder. Yes, there are. But that is the fact, that is the job, unfortunately. Some people do okay with it and get over those problems. Some people don't, unfortunately. Roughly about 15% of the population will suffer post-traumatic stress at some varying degree because of some traumatic incident. Obviously, it's magnified a bit more if you're in the army, certainly this last decade. So therefore, that's why it's very prevalent in the media, about soldiers with post-traumatic stress. The vast majority of people actually survive that quite well, and in fact, it's 20% of those cases that actually improve because of a traumatic event. There's the opposing side of post-traumatic stress is an improvement in the not in the excitement, fantastic, but actually the events or the traumatic event is seen as an advantage rather than a disadvantage.
Sorry to monopolize.
That's okay.
Can I? Yeah. Sorry to monopolize you, but do you know how many people you've killed in?
Yeah, but I'm not going to tell you.
Okay.
You see, I'm again naturally pointing, but I don't know if it's going to happen. Oh, it is. No, war's changed for the better. War's changed for the better because of weaponry and the way of thinking about weaponry. What you're trying to do continuously is have standoff. So if you look at from the very basic soldiers on the ground, for Afghanistan, something else that I do, I work for the MOD. I'm on the board of the private military company now, and we have contracts with the British government, the American government, and we do stuff with their different defence departments. In fact, I was in Afghanistan the last time was this March and April in Helmand with the Brits down there. Even at that low level, what we're trying to do is get weapons that, if you're the Taliban and you're firing at me, well, you've got, assault rifles, maybe effective, if you're good, 300 metres, all right? You might have RPGs coming out effective about 700 metres, and I'm thinking, right, I've got a big gun here that can fire at you from 1,200 metres, and they're called 50 cal machine guns. I've got general purpose machine guns that are effective, get a couple of them, 1,000 metres. So therefore, we can be sitting here, firing down at you, we can be brewing tea, and the lads could be killing you, and you're trying to fire at us. All they'll do is come, boom, and they'll fall short. Exactly the same when you look at the Battle of Cressy, where the reason why we were so good, because we had longbows. We had a better trajectory, we had better range, as opposed to, the French actually were Italian crossbow guys. First of all, the range wasn't long enough, and secondly, they took so long to reload. So as we advanced, the bowmen could keep on firing and firing and firing at a greater distance. So you can fire all day at me, and you're not going to hit me because I'm up here because I've got a better weapon. So you extend that from the infantry, you extend that to drones, which we've got thousands of now. Well, the Americans have got thousands. We're starting to get into our hundreds. Because obviously we're a very, very smaller force, and we would never get that magnitude of weaponry. And the idea of drones is that you can have remote conflict. There's many problems with that. But actually, if you're looking at the fact of saving soldiers' lives on the ground, I'm all for it. So obviously they've got to work on information. So there will be soldiers on the ground getting no information or maybe marking. But the more technically advanced it comes, and it's shooting up in that way, the far better it is. So from 20 years ago, the idea of standoff, we had standoff weapons. We would use fast jet support. We had laser, designators to mark targets and to do all that sort of stuff. All that was there. It's just now jumped because of the post 9/11 wars and the amount of money and effort that's been put into that. We've jumped even quicker in military technology than we did in the Second World War. It's gone woof, and it's fantastic. I'm all for it. So yes, a lot different from 20 years ago because of these two conflicts that we've been involved with. Responsibility. Yes, madam. And then we'll come back, honest.
How much sleep did you have on average whilst with the SAS?
How much sleep? Sleep. Well, actually, it's a good question. What happens with sleep is that in some cases quite, sort of intermittent. But there's a rule in the military, and there's this saying that you would learn as a recruit, is whenever there's a lull in battle, you get your head down because you don't know the next time you're going to be sleeping. So what happens was that there's terms that always come out. Okay, make sure the lads are in their sleeping bags. It might be 2:00 in the afternoon, but the fact is, if there's an hour of no activity, get them in their sleeping bags. They might not go to sleep, but there's the opportunity to go to sleep. Get them in their bags. Get them in the bags. Get them in the bags, because you don't know when. Sometimes in some high-intensity operations, certainly hostage-type situations, you could be sort of going for it up to 72 hours. At one stage, we were looking at using amphetamines to see if that would work, if you can keep more concentration. In fact, the French done extensive training and experiments with that to see if it would help their counter-terrorism troops. And it's all right to a certain point, but even being on amphetamines would affect your judgment, and also what happens as soon as you come off them, you're totally ineffective. So we decided not to. But in some cases, 24 hours, 36 hours isn't uncommon. But what you're trying to do is almost like a cow, 15 minutes here. You get to the point you have sort of the nods, as all people do, you're like this. And then you'd say, the guys are on neck breakers because they're just standing there like this. And then when you're really tired, they go, right, the guys are on back breakers, because you could be standing up and then you sort of just fall back as if you've gone unconscious, because you've fallen asleep. So then you know that you've got to stop. You've got to stop. Everyone's on back breakers. They've got to stop. Go on then. Sorry, I did promise. Sorry about that.
Quite a few of the Nick Stone books are he's working as black ops or deniable operations. I understand if it's one of those secret things you can't talk about, but how do you research something like that, since anyone who's involved in that can't really talk about it, or they're not supposed to reveal anything about it?
But that's the beauty of fiction. What you can do is take real life instances, if you like, and then put them into a fictional context. So the Nick Stone that came out last year was called Dead Center, was based on Somali piracy and the way that the kidnap and ransom, the K&R business works out of Somalia. Said I'm on the board of one of the private military companies, the one that recruited me initially. And that job was based on a real job that we had for one of the insurance syndicates to get out a Canadian and Australian journalists who went in there on day 2. They got lifted, and about trying to go in to try and find them, to try and negotiate a settlement to get them out. So what I used was the real-time timeline on that, and it was a 94-day timeline to get them out. But use that as the base of the reality and the way that it works, and then use Nick Stone, the character of Nick Stone, and the character and the history and his background to create more of the story about reality. And certainly in first-person narrative, it's the only way to go, because if you don't, you can do it two ways. You can go for the total fantasy, the Expendables sort of version, and that's fine because it's entertainment. But if you're trying to bring it down and trying to show reality, you've got to base it in reality. So I use that. I use the stuff with the PMC, the stuff that I do for the Ministry of Defence, and what's known as a talking head for the MOD. And the argument is you get a briefing every month from the MOD, and you try and influence the media debate. We try and influence the media debate. The vast majority of the time it doesn't work. Sometimes it does. So you can mix and max reality and put it into a fictional context. Go that way. It's just great trying to see people get them. That's why everybody in the centre is getting picked. Just see how to get the mics to you.
Do you think compulsory military service could improve British society?
No, not at all. I think it would degrade it. And that's one of the reasons why most, certainly Western societies, keep. I think the Swiss have still got military service. The Israelis have even changed their military contract to one of a civil sort of service, a choice to work for the civil population or to work with the military. I think if you've got people that are being coerced into serving 2 years, say, in a system they don't want to be part of, it not only degrades the system, the military, because so much time, effort and expense is trying to contain and train and deal with all the problems of people who don't want to be there, it actually makes the people coming out even more disenfranchised. Certainly the French experience of people getting ready to go to university, and it was cut because certainly their social mobility was really suffering because of that. You've got guys who had the opportunity to get somewhere, to go to university, maybe come from a working class background. Certainly the Algerian population in southern France near Marseille. And what happened, they had to go into military service, and they lost that opportunity of social mobility. So it was totally counterproductive. And the argument is in the military sense, it's if you don't want to be here, you can always get out. So you don't want people who don't want to be there, because it is, getting back to your question, it is a quite sort of niche business. So no, I'm sure it would make a lot of people happy that they're getting disciplined, but they're not getting disciplined. All they're doing is getting disenfranchised. Yes. Right, I'll do you first. Sorry, I didn't see it. But do you know what? Excuse me, I'll do you, and then we'll come to you. Okay.
I read recently that the German army has sort of this clause where you can question the moral judgment of your commander if you feel that it's sort of reprehensible in sort of any way. So I basically have two questions. First of all, have you ever had sort of a similar scenario where you've really questioned the morality of a particular mission? And secondly, do you think that German arrangement is a good one?
Yeah, well, we turn them upside down. Yes, I think it's a good one. And it happens in the British Army. It's not as if, we tend to think of the military based on what we've seen, black and white films, Sir John Mills, going through the desert, whatever. It's not like that anyway. People do question orders. People do look at the situation. And my own personal experience was an operation we conducted in the Special Air Service with the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, which was a long, ongoing operation. Quite a few guys had gone and churned through that job, and it was exposed by John Pilger, the Australian or New Zealand report. I can't remember where it comes from. So the operation was exposed. We're working with the Khmer Rouge, Pol Pot connotations, and there was pictures of special forces with the Khmer Rouge, literally by these mountains of bone. Some people questioned it because of the connotations with Pol Pot. The vast majority stayed. I'd done the job. There were one or two that disagreed with it and got out of the Special Air Service. But it's no big sort of disgrace. It's not as if you can say, I don't want to do that job, but I'll go and do that job. again, if you don't like it, get out. And what happens? You say, well, I disagree with it. So they got out. And, it's not as if they're shunned. It's, people are adults. It's a moral decision. And in fact, one became a vicar and the other one went to work for a private military company, the two guys that got out. So, yeah, people do question it. And even, 18-year-old soldiers in Afghanistan look at the situation that they're in and look at it and ask questions. They ask political questions and moral questions as well about what is going on. And I think it's very healthy. And again, even an 18-year-old soldier, if he doesn't like it, comes back, gets out, if he wants. One more. So the pressure's on. The best question's got to be.
You must have had some very unpleasant experiences in your time in the military. But given that they've all been shaped who you are today, would you go through them again?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I think that it doesn't matter what you're involved with. Some days you have good days, bad days. In different days, you make great decisions, really bad decisions. But if you don't, first of all, take responsibility for the bad ones. We always take responsibility for the good ones. They're always our decisions. But you've got to take responsibility for the bad decisions as well, and hopefully learn by it. And if you can do that, what happens is it all sort of evens up. And certainly, not at the time, but as I went through my army career, I felt quite privileged to be there in the first place, to be getting what I was getting. And primarily for that was something that I enjoyed, but at the same time, an education, which became very important to me because I understood. No one should go to school until they're 19, because it's only then you understand that you need an education. At 14, what do you want one of them for? And that was my problem. So getting into the military was fantastic. So, well, we've got this wonderful opportunity, not only to be a soldier that I particularly liked, but at the same time, get an education. So for me, I wouldn't change anything because everything was good. Because without that, I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing now as well.
Well, I'm sure we would like to roll around the doors.
Thank you.